Hello viewers from wherever you're watching us from. This is your weekly State of Affairs program here on QTV, and we're broadcasting from our studios here on Kairaba Avenue. My name is Aliou Cisse, and I'm here with my co-host Mr. Modou Mbodj, stepping in for Mr. Sidi Cisse. Mr. Mbodj, good to have you in the program.
I'm glad to be here, Aliou.
Thank you very much. That's Mr. Modou Mbodj, who is stepping in for Mr. Sidi Cisse. Our guest this week is someone who is not new to many. I mean, he's been very active in Gambian politics. I mean, last year he was among those who were disqualified by the Independent Electoral Commission from contesting in the presidential election, but we later saw in the parliamentary election his party put up 11 candidates to contest in the parliamentary election. Well, not long ago we also heard him, announcing that they are forming an alliance with the President's National People's Party. Well, our guest this week is Dr. Ismaila Cisse, who is a highly respected political science lecturer at the University of the Gambia and leader of CA. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Yes, like I said, I mean, many were surprised when they had CA in this case, because CA belongs to so many people that, you have announced that, you are forming an alliance with the President's National People's Party. Going back, your difference with the president back then, you were very critic of his government. Why the sudden change?
Well, I'm not surprised that many are surprised. Or perhaps I'm surprised because politics is full of surprises. But why the sudden change is that we came to realize that the president has an agenda that wants to transform this country. Now, before the elections, obviously, all of us sought the high office by coming up with our different manifestos and programs and policies to transform this country. We went out, all of us, to the people to sell this agenda to the people. But the people bought the president's agenda, giving him a very strong mandate. And we had made a promise during the campaign trail that whoever wins besides us will support that person, because we think that it is unnecessary to have all these beautiful ideas to transform this country and sit on them just because we are not elected. The president is elected, President Adam Barrow is elected, he's going to govern for the next 5 years, and then we think that it is wise for us to share our ideas with him. If that aligns with his own vision, or also with his intentions to transform this country, I think the Gambia would benefit from it.
So far, how is the new marriage going on, the new relationship?
It's going smoothly. Currently, parties are busy with their congresses. The alliance has two components. The first component is to prepare the ground as part of an alliance for the local government elections in May 2023. The second component is to align policies, because we know the country is going through so many different challenges, very complex challenges, from inflation to unemployment, you name it. And we think that where we can also bring our ideas together, align it with the government, align it with the policies of the NPP. Perhaps it could be of benefit to the country, but currently as we speak, everybody's preparing for Congress. All parties are busy with that, and we'll see more engagement or inter-alliance engagement after Congress.
Talking about issue of policies, trying to align, your policies with that of NPP, you talk about issue of inflation and employment. What exactly does CA seeks to achieve from this, alliance with NPP?
Well, first of all, is to make sure that we find sustainable solutions to the current problems we are facing. And I think with NPP's vision, with their policies, with also our vision and our intention, our policies, if we sit and see where policy alignment is, we're able to solve or mitigate the impact of most of these problems. Like I said, the president had made a clarion call to every Gambian to come on board and support and work with his government, despite political differences, despite no other differences, particularly politics, because we are talking about politics. But he's made a clarion call that let's all work together for the interest of this country. And I think it's important that we answer this clarion call, because we are not the type of politicians who will sit and hope and wish for the president to fail, because the president's failure would be perhaps our success. That is what many politicians think, that let the president fail. If he fails, now the people can have us as an alternative. But not knowing of the far-reaching implications for that. Gambia is a very young country going through a very difficult transition, meaning if the president fails this term, it can have far-reaching consequences for the next generation. And we are not the type of politicians who would want that to happen, even though we might think that that would be in our interest, because if he fails, then people can come and vote us as an opposition. But that is not how we think. We think of the country first. So we want the president to succeed in this term, If he succeeds, Gambia succeeds. If you wish for the president to fail, it's like being part of a ship, and you wish for the captain to fail. If the captain fails, you think that they might make you the new captain, not knowing that if the captain fails, the ship might drown, and all of you will not survive. So we don't want the president to fail. The country is facing very difficult challenges that are far-reaching consequences. These challenges are existential threats to this country, especially in the socio-economic aspect. So we want the president to succeed, and we are going to support him to succeed because we believe in him and we believe in his agenda.
Before I bring in Mr. Mboj here, I mean, how do you react to those who said, I mean, CA is joining NPP because it's a matter of survival for them, that, you know, your party is broke, you have no support base, so you are just leaning on NPP to be relevant. How do you respond to those who, you know?
Well, I've made statements before that what people think and say about me or us, we have no control over. What we have control over is our actions and inactions, and we take full responsibility. We respect everybody's opinion. It's a democracy, free society. People have a right to make their opinions. There are those who equally think that it's in the interest of the nation and that we are doing it genuinely. So there are people who have a right to their opinions. We cannot respond to everybody's opinion.
Mr. Mboj, I know you.
Yes, Dr. Sise, thanks for coming. You said that the decision to form an alliance with NPP was taken by the executive, but wasn't the sort of stuff that had to go to the membership? Wasn't that a bit like an executive order?
Yes, but you have to understand the complexity of our politics in the sense that we are elected as an executive to guide and provide leadership for the party. If every decision has to go to the membership, it means that then we are failing to provide leadership and vision. And also, it's very difficult to go back to all the members across the country and also in the diaspora.
But this was a fundamental, surely they had to do with the very life of the party. This was a fundamental issue. And we know that fundamental issues, really good practice would dictate that you go back to the membership, to the grassroots. They decide that.
Not necessarily. If a government wants to form, if the Gambia government decides today to cut ties with China and go to Taiwan, should they go back to the people?
That is not fundamental. There are certain decisions you have to go to referendum.
It's a fundamental policy. It's a fundamental policy shift. And in the Gambia, what the government decides, no matter how fundamental it is, we don't go for referendum. The government is elected to provide leadership, and the government has to do so based on their judgment. Leaders provide leadership.
The analogy is wrong here. You are not in government.
No, we are no.
You're not in government.
Now let me tell you the analogy.
When you are in government, the imperatives of government, you never felt that pressure.
No, not necessarily. Let me tell you the analogy here. Government is elected to provide leadership. We as an executive are elected to provide leadership. And we make decisions, no matter how difficult these decisions are, no matter how unpopular these decisions are. And if the general membership is not happy, and if it doesn't go well, they can vote us out at Congress. But we have to provide leadership. We cannot take every decision to the members. It doesn't work like that.
Nobody was saying that you should take every decision to the leaders. We're just talking about this specific one because of its fundamental nature. Take it to the membership. Not everyone. So we're not saying that. We're just talking about this particular one.
The Constitution doesn't dictate that we have to take certain issues to the membership for
decide. Good practice, democracy. We were just talking about democracy.
Well, good practice is relative and subjective as well. We think it is good practice to provide leadership because we think that we made good judgment in working for the interest of this country and also for the interest of the party to form an alliance with NPP. And I think the majority of our members accepted this decision and they're supporting us.
But I mean, we have seen in your executive, certain key executive members resign from the party. Why?
They, like for example, who?
Well, Nene Freda Gomez.
She did not resign.
She was expelled.
Nene was suspended.
Why?
Well, that's an internal issue that I don't want to bring here, obviously, but she was suspended from the party executive, but she's still a member of the party. Dominic Mendy resigned for best reasons known to him. Political parties are like that. People come and go. People have a right to join and associate because they share a vision. Once that vision is not shared anymore, they have a right to disassociate, and I think we accept that. So, I mean, these things are normal in politics. They are no big deal, big things in politics.
And now, let's move forward. I mean, look at current issues that are happening. I mean, you know, certainly people are complaining about the rise in the cost of living. I mean, issue of corruption, all these things have come up. I mean, the government is being criticized by some people who believe the government is doing much. I mean, do you agree with those people who claim the government is not doing much in order to uplift or better the lives of the people?
Well, I think the government is doing its best. The government is doing what it can, and you have to know these are very difficult times globally. Cost of living crisis is not peculiar to Gambia alone. It's all over the world, it's global. After the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we had war. And you have to understand that Ukraine is a major producer of food commodities as well. The COVID-19 pandemic brought about supply chain disruptions. China was closed down. China is the workshop of the world, if I may use that term. China was closed down. It led to an energy crisis because of the war in Ukraine. And when energy prices go up, there are a knock-on effect on every sector. So these are global challenges that every country is facing with, even the most developed nations. Britain lost 3 prime ministers in 3 months because of the cost of living crisis. You see what's happening in Ghana, in Sri Lanka, in Senegal. It's a global phenomenon. Perhaps what we could ask the government to do is to find tangible solutions to these problems. And if they think that these are complex problems, and we all agree, is to communicate better with the citizenry so the citizens understand what's happening. But let me tell you something. Countries are facing difficult times to solve, especially a country like Gambia, where we import a significant chunk of our basic needs. When you import that, you also import it with inflation and also with the problem. So when the price of rice or price of will go up in the global markets, inflation is imported also, and there is no short-term fix to it. There are long-term fixes to it. I think this government now has to find a long-term solution to say, we have to be food secure. We cannot rely on the West for our sustenance or global markets, because if that happens, then we'll find ourselves in this situation when such upheavals happen. Again, now is the time to put the systems together to make sure that we go back to agriculture, we go to large-scale agriculture, to make sure Gambia is food secure, to create the systems so that we can also start manufacturing, so that we reduce our dependence on the outside world for the things that we need to consume. Otherwise, believe me, there are no short-term solutions to these problems, and no country has it.
That's very interesting, because that's like the longer-term solution. And you are absolutely right. No single government really created the global crisis, but you respond to it. Britain, part of the reasons really why Liz Truss left was with that mini budget, the response, what it causes. So how would you rate, how would you evaluate our response to it? You did not create it, but certainly you have to respond. How would you evaluate Gambia's response to this?
You are right. What governments do is to respond to mitigate the impacts of it. But you have to understand also Gambia's situation. Gambia is not a rich country. Gambia is struggling financially. You mentioned the UK. The mini budget was to do partly that. I recall one of the things that brought Rishi Sunak to power was the so-called follow scheme. When the COVID-19 started, he came with the follow scheme of 70 billion pounds to say that people go home, don't work because of COVID, but we'll pay a full salary. Gambia cannot afford to do that. So what happens is that the government has responded, partly because government has spent billions of dollars in subvention to the energy sector, because it's a critical sector. If government had not done that, believe me, energy prices would have gone up significantly in the pumps. We'll be paying $150, $270 per liter. But government has responded by pumping billions of dollars as subvention to the energy sector to reduce the impacts as well. But African governments, not only Gambia, their hands are tied, because financially we are aid dependent mostly, we are impoverished. And I think now this gives us an opportunity. Every crisis comes with an opportunity. This gives us an opportunity now to rethink our development strategy, to rethink development, so that now we start to go inwards and make sure that we are sustainable economically, in agriculture, in energy, so that when this crisis happens globally, we are not totally insulated, but at least the impact will be minimal. But now, to be honest, any government that tells you that they have a solution to this problem, especially in the African continent, they are joking. Ghana is way ahead of us in terms of democracy. Their democracy is consolidated. Economically, Ghana has gas and oil and gas. Ghana has a huge cocoa industry. Ghana is financially stronger, but today they are facing a crisis to the extent that people are coming out calling for the president to resign. So this problem is a problem that every government is dealing with.
This is interesting. Just one more. Just one more. So it appears as if, apart from the subsidies, the government really cannot do much.
Now, what the government is doing, the government is doing a lot. I mean, obviously, I don't work in government, so I'm not familiar with what's happening within the internal governance structures, this one of the government. What I can see from the outside is what I'm seeing.
So what effects are you seeing?
For me, I think one is the energy sector. I mean, apart from that, I'm not seeing government giving, having a generous welfare system to mitigate the impact. So Obviously, I cannot tell you exactly is what they've done because I don't know. But what I'm saying is which is clear to me is that there has been a significant pump of money into the energy sector to provide subventions so that energy prices are stabilized, because this high energy prices has a knock-on effect on the entire on all the sectors. So obviously it's for the government to now come and tell you from government what they are doing, but from my point of view, I cannot speak for government.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Just one more, Ali. The other day, not long ago, Halifa said that it appears that with this government, their modus operandi is trial and error. How would you respond to that?
But I think all governments since Jawara has been doing that. Their modus operandi is trial and error.
But you're bound to have a strategy. His idea is that, yes, there is that element, obviously, but you need to have a grand strategy of what I need to do. Obviously, you wouldn't have all the facts unless you begin to implement. To that extent, there is a trial and error bit, but there must be it must be embedded in a strategy. I think that's what he's.
I agree with you. I think every government, whether Gambia or outside, needs a long-term strategy to deal with issues. But remember, Gambia is in a very precarious situation. Why? Because today, and this government is very unfortunate, because they came to power at a time when there's global upheaval, global economic upheaval, and they have to deal with that. Secondly, they have to deal with today's complex problems which are perennial, which are inherited in every sector, from agriculture to the economy to energy, you name it, they inherited that. So the government has a problem of solving today's complex problems in a transition that has really faced hiccups. At the same time, also come up with a long-term strategy, a long-term development vision to provide the basic needs of the next generation. It's a very Herculean task. And no, we can stay outside and criticize government and say this is how it's true. But once you are in, when you face the task, it's very difficult. And we all know that is why when the president calls for all of us to come and support, we are coming to support, because we know no one person can do it. Government alone cannot do it. It's a difficult situation. And I think the government, let's be fair to them, they've accepted their shortcomings, that they've accepted that these are challenging times. It is for every citizen now to come together to help the government and work together for the interest of this country.
I just want to come in here. I mean, like you said, I mean, the current reality is not peculiar just to Gambia. You mentioned Ghana, Senegal, and other countries. But, I mean, in terms of our economy, I mean, how financial discipline is the government considering the way they spend our resources, especially on overseas travels?
Yeah, well, obviously, everybody agrees to that. That government has to revisit in terms of how they manage our finances. And I think this is one of the things that we need to give the government as an advice, that we need to cut spending. We need to come up with austerity measures, because if you are going through difficult times, you have to check how you spend money. I don't know exactly what plans are underway for the government to consider these things, but these are things that we need to advise government that when you are facing a financial crisis, when you are facing a cost of living crisis, when they are facing inflation crisis, government needs to come up with monetary and fiscal policies to make sure they mitigate the impact of these things. And I think it's for the government now to listen to economists. And that is why sometimes I ask Gambians, we just criticize and criticize. If you're an economist and you see the government is not doing right, come up with solutions to the government. And if they don't agree, or if they don't listen to those solutions or fail to adopt it, then we can blame them. But I think it's time for us to put our heads together, everyone. It's a very difficult period. This government wasn't expecting, before they got to power in 2017, 2016, that they would witness a COVID-19 pandemic, that they would witness a war between Russia and Ukraine, which will, create problems, especially in the energy sector. You see what OPEC Plus did recently. They are going to decrease the amount of oil they are going to pump per barrel in the day, which is going to also further increase energy costs. So it's a difficult period. I think everybody should come together. Like I said, this is an advice to government that they need to come up with austerity measures, cut spending, and make sure that frivolous spendings are considered. Travel obviously is reduced, except for essential travel. I like the fact that initially when the coalition government just came to put what they call the vehicle policy, they need to come up with strategies to make sure that at least spending is cut in some areas, so that we can be able to divert and spend that money to make sure people live a worthwhile and dignified life.
But are you surprised that this vehicle policy is not implemented?
Well, I don't know the reasons why. I don't know the reasons why it's not implemented. So I cannot speak to that fact. But I think government needs to really sit and come up with a strategy to ensure that our public finances are properly managed, are properly spent, especially spent for the people, spent in education, healthcare, security, infrastructure. These are key, and I think government should really consider doing that.
And looking at, like you said, I mean, many will say, okay, these are things that we are building up. I mean, we saw it coming. It's more like governments, not only Gambia, are trying to use the Russia-Ukraine war as an excuse, but the issue of high cost of living was here well before the Russia-Ukraine war, well before the COVID-19. We remember you were one of the, you were a critic to the extent you were called for questioning at the police headquarters. So how do...
No, I mean, I never critiqued high cost of living. Why I was called to the police was security, about the role of economic, but also how government needs to consider internal security going forward. So, cost of living. I agree with you that cost of living, inflation has been rising, but not significant as we are seeing in the past since the pandemic started. Remember, this government came to power in 2016, 2017, 18, 19, almost end of 19, the pandemic started. And government is not, it's not like instant coffee development. Government, it takes time, especially after the 22-year dictatorship. That transition is very difficult and so on. So government was facing a lot of challenges. But what I'm trying to say is that also government needs to consider some of this inflation also is not natural, it is artificial. Because some people piggyback on it. Some people think that, okay, now prices are going up, they increase their prices with no justification whatsoever. I think government needs to look at that. There are shops here, there are people here who increase their prices without any proper right justification. I think government needs to have to bring high-handedness and make sure that they deal with these people.
And so you're saying price control?
Not price control, because price control is not good for the economy. What I'm saying is
that what instruments?
There is, I'll give you an example. There are monopolies going on in this country, especially among some segments, some sectors in our economy. People who just meet in a WhatsApp group at night and they set the price, and the following day, because they're the only ones who are selling it. When you come the following day, they tell you the same price. But government now needs to make sure that prices in the market are consummate with global market price. That is why government needs to come up as Minister of Trade with a list of all the goods and commodities that are sold in our markets and peg and say, because if government do their calculation from source to the shop, they can be able to tell you what the price would be for this bottle of water. They can do their calculation that you buy it for 50 cents in China. These are the shipping costs. These are the transportation costs. This is cost. So this is the profit to be added there, at least. The government can say, Gambians, they can bring a list every week to say, when it comes to iron rods, 12 millimeters, this is the price between this and this. So anybody who sells it more than that, we know that you are overcharging.
But that's price control, essentially.
No, it's not price control. It's price control means that like interfering in the economy.
Well, you're setting prices, the range. You're setting prices.
It's price control, but not to the extent that forcing consumers to sell at the price where they're at a loss. In this case, consumers, the sellers are not losing because we know the price. We know how much this water should cost in the shops. Price control to some extent sometimes, not the price control which has negative impacts, which says that you are forced to sell it at this price even though you are running at a loss. But what I'm trying to say is that government needs to be able to tell Gambians of all the commodities from construction to food to whatever, at least most of the prominent commodities that on a weekly basis or monthly basis, a list of this is the rate. But today, you go to shops, they tell you come to a big milk, $50 tomorrow, $10 is without any justification, and some of them will tell you the dollar has gone up. So I think government needs to come up with very stringent, it needs to take a tougher action against those who create this artificial inflation.
But do you know of any country where this system operates, where they set this range on prices of? In
other countries, the shopkeepers are forced to put prices on their commodities.
Absolutely, but that is not telling them the price.
Exactly.
Absolutely, that's obvious. We should have all of that. But here, this system that you're talking about, having this range, is there anywhere else where
I'm not aware of any country which does it, especially in the African continent, but these are innovative ideas that we can use. It doesn't mean that some countries have to do it. But the most important thing is that other countries, I don't think their people or their sellers really exploit the population as we are doing now. People sell prices, goods and commodities at a price, to be honest, which are not really realistic, which are not justifiable. So I think tougher tougher issues call for tougher actions. I think government is taking tougher action now to make sure now we are not going to set the price to say by force sell this water at this price, even if it means you are going to lose, because if sellers are forced to sell this water below profit price, they'll not sell it, and that will lead to scarcity. And scarcity leads to further inflation. We don't want that to happen, but we'll make sure that the public is informed of the prices based on all the costs, but also the seller is not also forced to sell at a price that is below. We'll tell that this is the price that this seller can sell this water yet making profit. If it goes beyond this, then we have to make sure that we deal with those people. But the way things are going now, some people raise prices without any justification. I think government needs to take a tougher stance.
I mean, you talk about how some people take monopoly of the of certain sectors. I mean, others will even suggest perhaps government can even go into importing rice or importing other basic commodities. These are some suggestions that people are even making. Perhaps with that the price can come down. Do you agree with those who believe?
I'm not a fan of, I believe in the private sector. I believe in the markets as the most efficient way of generating wealth. But also I believe that the market and its vagaries are also exploitative. That is why I believe in the government not interfering in the generation of wealth in the market, but the redistribution of that wealth in accordance with the principles of fairness, meaning that the government now has to come in through taxes and so on and so. But I'm not a fan of government doing business. I don't think governments are not very good at doing business. We've seen there's enough empirical evidence in the post-colonial African states that when governments do business, they don't do it, they are not very efficient. So I'm not a fan of, I think government should just lay the foundations. Government should lay what they call a playing ground that is level, and make sure that the incentives are there, make sure that the market functions properly, provide the regulations, provide the policy so that people can do business, and make sure that they bring regulations that can discourage or perhaps in fact not allow monopoly-like situations. For example, if only a few people can bring rice in the Gambia, then there's a problem. What government can do, instead of going into business, it also to provide access to finance to young Gambian-based entrepreneurs to bring rice, but not government itself doing it, but provide access to finance, because access to finance is key in this entire sector. Why many young Gambians don't venture into this business? Because of access to finance. You need capital. These are capital-intensive businesses. But what government can do is to find facilities and ways so that they can work with the banks to provide facilities for young Gambian entrepreneurs to get into these sectors, so that at least the sector is saturated to the extent that monopoly will be a thing of the past.
Earlier on, you mentioned about agriculture. I mean, this is an area that many will say is underutilized. We have the land, we have the water, but this is a sector that we have seen millions have been spent on agriculture, but the results?
Well, it's unfortunate, and I think it's sad. I don't recall any sector that has received more funding than the agricultural sector in the Gambia. Think of since '65, all the projects agriculture, yet we cannot feed ourselves. Then there's a problem somewhere. I think now the idea is for us to come up with really, really, really robust agricultural policies that can ensure that we increase our production capacity, that can ensure that we mechanize agriculture, that can ensure that we move away from subsistence agriculture to large-scale commercial agriculture, that can ensure we move away from seasonal agriculture to round-the-year agriculture. It's sad. Yesterday I was going around looking for mandarin. They said it's scarce in the market because it's not coming anymore. I mean, Gambia is the most suitable country to grow mandarin. I would have expected Gambia today to have kind of baskets in CRR, in URR, so we know exactly where these things grow. We should have seen plantations of pineapple, of bananas, of mandarin. In these places, this provides employment, it brings economy. I don't know why still this thing continues to evade us as a country, to be honest. And I think this is one of the things that this current government, under the leadership of President Barrow, should really consider these things and bring the right agricultural experts to come up with the agricultural economists, to come up with people who understand these issues, to sit together and map out and design a long-term agricultural blueprint for this country so that Gambia can be self-food sufficient and become a breadbasket of Africa within the next 10 to 15 years.
Well, unfortunately, most of these projects that we have are just endless workshops, treks here and there. Mr. Mboch.
Yes, I'm not going to sort of ask you about policy issues. Maybe when you're given a cabinet post, I might do that. Let's put it this way. Your description of what's been happening with the government, how you've been describing everything, apart from, of course, the COVID-19 bit and the Russia-Ukraine war. But one could have described it similarly much earlier on, around 2018, 2019. In many ways, the government was trying to really deal with a whole lot out inheritance, if you like, the civil service, public institutions, and all the rest of it. But yet, this was the period that you called our president clueless. Afterwards, when we joined, most of us said, so he has clued up in such a short space. Yes, you didn't contest in the presidential elections, and in the National Assembly, yes, you put up 11 candidates, but not a single one won into the Assembly. So one can say that CA, what is it taking to this alliance? I mean, electorally, it appears as if you are just a party in name. Electorally, one hasn't seen anything. What are you taking to the table? Is this about CA or is it about Dr. Ismaila Ceesay?
About the country. About the country, like I said.
But the country didn't take a decision. Yeah. Dr. Ismaila Ceesay took a decision.
For the country.
So we won.
For the country.
That's what the country, everyone would say.
That's what I'm saying. and there is people have a right to, I think people should respect our decision. That's a free society, that if we say that we are doing it for the country, we have yes, you mentioned in 2018, I was a critic, yes. I was a critic. But now I realize that being on the sidelines and critiquing alone wouldn't solve the problems. It wouldn't solve the problem, the complex problems. And now
so it wasn't about anything that Barrow did, but it was just your insight into what was it? Or was it what Barrow did?
It was the way we saw things. And we have to also remember that there's a government. Sometimes we tend to blame the president. The president has a government. The president cannot do it alone. That is why the president has a cabinet. Appoint ministers, appoint directors in agencies, appoint this, appoint that. So people can do the work. And the president's role is to make sure that people who don't perform, and they are given the sack.
The buck stops with him.
Exactly. So obviously, at the end of the day, you'll blame the president if things go wrong, and that is a fact. But also, what I'm trying to say is that currently, as we speak, the president has made a call that the country is facing challenges, and we need all cool heads to come and work together to build this country. It is within that spirit and context that we want to help the president and join him to work together for the interest of this country. So what we are doing is for the interest of this country.
Why didn't you contest a parliamentary seat? Somebody came to me and said, now look at the presidential elections. We've got these three younger gentlemen, all educated, fantastic. But somehow when it came to the National Assembly, none of them wanted to contest. Do they think that they're just good for the top job? How would you respond
That's
to that?
a very good observation. However, that is not the reason why we did not contest. I'm not a very good lawmaker. I don't see myself in the legislature.
Political scientist.
I'm not but political scientist, but people do what they think they are good at. I'm more of a pragmatic person. I like doing things. I like see action. I see results. So for me, I don't see myself in the legislature. I don't think I would be a good person in the legislature. And we had people within the party who wanted to contest, and I think we should have given them the chance to contest. And it was a very difficult period as well. And remember also, we tried to contest the presidential elections after a very tough period. We were rejected. And then the aftermath of that, obviously, it was very difficult within that three months period to really, for that to sink and for you to really stabilize and go and campaign again. We have to also remember the personal aspect of it. Sometimes people see politicians as robots. No, politicians are human beings. They have family, they have emotions, they have personal issues. So there are things that don't come out about politicians that some people might understand. But the reason why we did not, or I cannot speak for did not contest for the parliament, is not because I think I'm only good for the top job. It's because I don't think I would be a good lawmaker.
Yeah, that's it. So here, this is interesting. I wouldn't let you go without asking this, Ali, I have to say. You're relatively new into politics. What I would love to explore here is your experiences forming a party, leading a party to elections, how does the political landscape look from within? If you know what I mean. I mean, I had a professor of politics in Sierra Leone called Ramadan Doumbouya. Whenever we ask him a question, he would say, in what capacity? Is it as Ramadan Doumbouya, a man as a politicized being, or as a political scientist? He was also one time vice president of Sierra Leone, or as a politician. You have these three domains of politics. How did it change? How did this experience sort of...
Well, it was quite an amazing experience. What you are taught in political science classrooms, the theories of politics and the concepts are different from what you see when you go down onto the ground and you start dealing with day-to-day politics. It's very, very, very different, especially in the African context, especially in the Gambian context. Perhaps in other countries in the West, even in the West it's different. That's why I once told my students that transitioning from a political science professor to being a politician and transitioning again has been a very, very, very difficult period. But again, like I said, 2016, 2021, even though I was unfortunate to contest, it provided me with a huge, huge lot of experience for me to understand how the Gambian political landscape and the political theater works and functions. It exposed to me most of the things that are happening there that I can arm myself with for my future political career.
Such as what? Let us in on the secret. Let us in.
For example, I'll give you an example. That the average Gambian voter is not interested in policy. The average Gambian voter is thinking of his or her next meal. I've been to places, villages, had important meetings with people. You lay a vision for them that if we do X, Y, Z, the results will be in 15 years. Your kids unborn, they'll benefit this, because what we do is what at CE not only focus on today's problems, but also we want to build the country for the future. We believe that it takes every generation, so it takes one generation to change the fortunes of the entire country. If we don't build this country now, the next generation will suffer. And how do we build this country? We look at trends and projections. The projections say every day 142 children are born in this country. The average woman gives birth to 5.3 children. It means in 2050 will be 5 million people. Do we have enough water for 5 million people as we speak? No. Do we have enough electricity? Do we have enough roads? Do we have enough food? No. What we need to do now is to start building those systems now, so that in 2050, those who are coming are not going to focus on their own problems, but to start building for the next. That's how the country works. So now, when I tell these people this, they'll tell me, what you are saying is true, but me, I don't have food even to eat for my children. So you see, people are the day-to-day the day-to-day things that bother people at the local level is different from how you think at that abstract political level. And we need to understand that and accept that this is the situation. Things will change, obviously, but political theory and partisan politics at the grassroots level in the African countries, especially in Gambia, they are far apart.
But isn't this really where the problem is, where you want to do democracy, isn't it? Democracy's assumptions, really, that when I educate my people, I give them information, they will take the rational decision. That's really the assumptions. But here, as you said, where the average person is thinking about your next meal, this is going to be an extremely, extremely long road. Little wonder that the countries that really develop quickly, that radical development we want, don't tend to be democratic. China is one of them and others. So you, as a political scientist, what kind of government do you think we should have? What kind of governance idea, democracy, whatever? What kind of governance do you think we should have? Well, given the reality, now that you've tasted the reality.
I'm a Democrat. However, I'm aware of the weaknesses and the gaps. Now, there's a cycle here. How are you going to break that cycle? We need a leader, a radical leader, a transformative leader, to provide this type of education we are saying, so people are informed to choose their leaders. But also, we need the people to choose that leader. That is where that comes in. And let's take Rwanda, for example.
It's a chicken and egg question.
Exactly.
Here. Where is it
let's take Rwanda, for example. Without the genocide, today Rwanda would have been still the old Rwanda, pre-94 Rwanda. It wouldn't change. It took a genocide and a war to bring a transformative leader to change the fortunes of Rwanda. So how that's going to happen is sometime, let's see how it works. I'm optimistic that one day the Gambian people will elect a leader who thinks like that. But for now, democracy is under threat, not only in Gambia, but also most African countries, because the things that make democracy thrive, that give oxygen to democracy, are literacy and widespread prosperity, are absent in most of these African countries. And if these don't happen, people will be voting for, it's called politics of the belly. That is, people vote for politicians who give them money and who give them rice and oil and money. And that wouldn't solve the continent's problem.
And whose responsibility is it to make people literate, and how?
The state, obviously. And that is why we are hopeful that the current government, under the leadership of the president, will come up with education reforms, will come up with the, currently I've seen Professor Per Gomez, Minister of Education, doing a fantastic job in terms of tertiary education, in terms of skills for our young people. I think now the next thing is for the president now to consider reforming the basic education sector to make sure that every Gambian who is born in this country, whether you are born in Kololi or Sibito, you have access to the right type of education, which is quality education, so they can be able to live a worthwhile life as a citizen in this country. So there is no discrimination anymore in terms of education quality and delivery in the country. I think this is key for us to change the fortunes of this country.
You talk about issue of quality. Access, many will say there are schools everywhere. I mean, a lot of classrooms have been built. But in terms of quality, you are a lecturer at the University of the Gambia. What's your take on the
quality? Is poor. Quality is poor, but quality is poor, and you have to understand the education policy is a long-term, thing. When you invest in education 2021, and you even change the policies, you wouldn't see the results until in 10-15 years. See, recently there was failures. The seeds of this failure were planted 15-20 years ago when they changed the whole entire system. They had the morning, afternoon, they neglected Gambia College. This is the results, obviously. And if we don't really, and this will continue for the next, don't expect anything better in the next 5 to 7 to 8 years. Don't expect. So what we need to now is, as a matter of urgency, is to start investing in education, taking education seriously, reforming education sector. Then we'll see the results in 2030, 2035. But also thinking that the world is moving. We are moving towards drones, artificial intelligence, you name it. And I think it's for us to go back to the education sector and reform it, not only to solve today's problems, but also to build us the society we want in the future.
But what do you, what's going to be a response to many who will say, perhaps the system is what it is because most of the people who are there, they don't have their kids attending public schools. They are all attending private schools.
Well, that's a problem, and I agree with that. If your child is going to a private school, you don't care about, but I think now it's time for us to get the right politicians, the right civil servants, the right policymakers with the right mindset who believe in inclusive education, obviously. And I think this can change. I would rather have inclusive education in the Gambia. So my daughter or my son can have the same access to the same quality education like the one in Basse or Fonyi or Badibu, than having my child going to a good school, and I think that's okay. That will lead to a destructive society. If you are a parent and you have children, and your children have access to different types of treatment, different types of education, your family or your home will be disintegrated at some point. And for the security of this country in the long term, it is important that we provide access to inclusive education that has access to quality for everyone. Because if you think that, and it's a flawed thinking, that if your child goes to Spec or Marina, you are fine. No. Thinking that the other person's child goes to a bad school, you are sowing the seeds of a destructive society. And if that destruction happens, your child will not be spared or yourself. So it is in everybody's interest to make sure that people, every child born in this country, has access to the same quality education, because that will build us a more durable, a more sustainable, a more peaceful country.
Now, this is a fantastic point now to come in. You mentioned reforms and everything you've been talking about is really transformative. Quota system for women in the National Assembly, it's all the rage now. Do you agree with it?
Yes, I agree with it. I think the patriarchal system has created structural imbalances in this country that has created legal, institutional, and cultural barriers for women's participation in the political process, but also to take part in the highest decision-making levels. Currently, as we speak, 57% of our population are women. We have only 3 women in parliament, 5 3 in cabinet, 5 in parliament, only 3 got elected, 19 contested out of 247 candidates in National Assembly. That is poor. There is no woman governor. There is no woman head of institutions in terms of the state-owned enterprises. So I believe in affirmative action, not only quota system in parliament, which must be implemented, but also affirmative action to ensure, to cover for the shortfall of women participation in politics. We need to make sure that those appointable positions like head of police should be a woman, head of immigration, head of army perhaps, head of prisons should be a woman, head of GAMTEL, head of NAWEC. Most of these institutions, departments and agencies where the president can appoint directly, we should give a lot of them to women. At least that will cover for the shortfall we have now in having women in decision-making positions. So yes, a quota system I would support.
How would you respond to some people who say that actually it is undemocratic? You cannot impose whatever. You cannot tell me that you're going to give preferential, and this is what's happening here, giving preferential treatment to women. It is undemocratic and unmeritocratic, because here it is not about competence or ability. That's the primary factor. It is the gender.
No, not necessarily.
Because when you say 30% quota system, then you have to be a woman to qualify for that, and a female cannot be in there.
Yes.
A male cannot be in there. It's 30% female. So it is gender-centered.
It's gender-centered, but it is also to make sure that we provide a society that is focusing on equity and equality. Currently, it's not equitable. We don't live in an equitable society, because these imbalances are structural imbalances caused by patriarchy. The privileges that we the men had from independence are still the privileges we're having. The reason why what is happening today is because of the privileges we've had. That is why when people say that, then blame slavery for Africa's underdevelopment, I said no. The privileges that the white colonialists had that is what the generations are enjoying today. So for me, it's not undemocratic, but also it's not a preferential treatment. It is to make sure that we correct a system that has been flawed, that has been distorted, and that has made sure that women are confined to lower levels of governance, and which is not good for the country. Believe me, there is ample empirical evidence which suggests that women make better leaders, because if you look at all the characteristics that make up a good leader are all found in women: compassion, kindness, emotional intelligence, you name it. So it is unfortunate and it is unacceptable, and it would be a great disaster if 57% of our population are relegated to lower levels of governance and decision making. That will not be good for the country.
Doctor, I just want to come in here. I mean, communication is key, I mean, between the government and the people. But for many, there seems to be a problem as far as communication is concerned. The government, the communication is more reactionary. They only communicate when they are reacting to something.
I agree.
Do you think should
I
be the way
agree with
forward?
you. In fact, I've said that before. I think this government, under the President Adama Barrow's leadership, should reconsider and review its communications policy. It is very poor. It is very reactive. It is like a firefighting mode. And communication is key. You see, even though things are difficult, if the government was very good at communicating, it would have really lessened the impact of people's reaction to these difficult situations. I think it's important for the government to really review and revisit its communications policy and communication better with the public, and be more proactive in their communication and not just react. And also look at the language as well of this communication. It's key. You see, there's one thing happening in this country, discontent. A lot of people are discontent in the street. People are not happy. Cost of rising, cost of living crisis, many things, traffic and so on and so forth. And this is the time that government now should communicate with the people to ease their fears, to make sure this discontent is taken away. People can trust the government that, yes, even if government doesn't have all the solutions, once in a while coming up to say, well, we are aware that this is a traffic problem, we are working on this, these are our solutions. This will ease and know that the government is doing something. But once that is missing, it really breaks down the trust between the governed and the governors.
And now with all the...
That's it. Regarding governance itself, imagine we're sort of preparing a governance index, of giving you a scorecard out of 10. What would you give the government when it comes to governance?
Well, I wouldn't go into that. Why? Because of the circumstances. I would be very unfair if I try to gauge this government and giving a scorecard in terms of governance.
Why would you be unfair?
Because the circumstances around and the context within which they are governing is it's not conducive, but also it's not favorable to them.
It's part of being a leadership. Circumstances can never be favorable.
I agree.
You are the leader. Events happen. There was a British Prime Minister and somebody asked him, what do you think drives history? He said, events, there boy, events. So events happen, you must respond. That's when true leadership actually emerges.
I agree, but you have to understand that also the leader is heading a civil service. The leader is heading systems and ministries and departments and agencies. So therefore, it's a very complex period. Like I said, we are from a transition which was very difficult. We came to COVID, we came to war. So I don't think it will be fair for me to give the government a scorecard. What I can tell you is that the government is doing what it can to solve the problems. But I cannot give the government to say, I'll be very unfair to them.
What about its fight against corruption? How do you think it's performing?
I think corruption is an endemic in this country. It's not something new under this government. It's been happening since independence. Perhaps where this government is unlucky is that because of the freedoms provided now, the freedom of access to information with social media, it's more pronounced now. People get the more information. But corruption is in the system. It's systemic, and I think
everybody knows that. But we've been talking about
that's what I'm saying. That is now what we can advise the government is to make sure they come up with a robust strategy to fight corruption, to make sure that the anti-corruption bill goes to Parliament, to make sure that, because corruption also...
It's already in Parliament, it's at the constitutional
Yeah, exactly.
stage.
But also, corruption is a long-term project to fight. It's not a knee-jerk reaction to fight corruption. We have to understand the roots of corruption. First, it has to do with culture and education. There are people in the civil service who I speak with who think that receiving gifts and presents while performing their duty is okay. It is not okay. We have a problem in this country that is ethics in the civil service, but there is no course in our school syllabus which teaches our young people ethics in the civil service and prepare them for public office. So we have to look at that, but also the systems in terms of transparency, accountability, and we are going to make sure that we bring in ideas to the government that can focus on transparency, accountability, and make sure public finances are judiciously spent to serve the interest of the people. But corruption in this country, to be honest, is not a new
so we're running out of time, and probably we're going to end the program here. Doctor, I mean, you are aware that there's a planned protest by a coalition of progressive Gambians 11th of this month. What's your take on this planned protest?
Well, I think the fundamental question is, what will the protest serve? What purpose will it serve? Will it end corruption? Because I know their complaints are to corruption and rising cost of living. Now, immediately after the protests, will we see a decrease in rising in cost of living? Will we see an elimination of corruption? No. I think that, yes, protests are part of the political, how do you call it? It's part of the political, act, just like voting and so on, holding governments accountable. But it's normally the last resort. I would have asked or wanted this coalition of...
But it is their right.
Yeah, but it is also the government's right to protect life and property as well.
No, but make that leap, that these people, they've applied to go on protest, to make that leap, that when you give it to them, it may necessarily, or it might lead to some kind of social breakdown. That is a huge assumption.
Okay, let me just come in there. Let me come in there. Now, that is one thing. In as much as perhaps, I don't know, these guys who are doing this protest, they might have good intentions. But these protests can have far-reaching consequences for the stability of this country. Because when it starts, you see, small events can lead to a chain of events that can lead to unforeseen circumstances. So what I'm saying is that Gambia is facing a very difficult period. The country is still fragile after the transition, which is not complete yet. For me, I would have wanted these guys, if they really are genuine about what they are saying, to first engage government, come up with a blueprint, a solution first, to say, government, we know you are facing a problem, cost of living, corruption. Here is a blueprint, a solution. Let's have a dialogue and see how we can solve this problem. If government doesn't show political will, last resort. But for me, I don't see...
Around the world, Dr. Sise, people are protesting, even though it is difficult. We are all facing the same difficulty.
No, but
this is their basic right. It is their basic right to protest.
Context is different. In Ghana has what they call their democracy is consolidated. Ghana doesn't have any fragility, they are not from a transition. Our situation is different and unique and complex. Therefore, for me, I see no purpose for this protest, and I would advise all young people to stay away from this protest because it doesn't serve any purpose, it doesn't bring any benefit to anybody, and understand as well that government, in as much as people have a right to protest, government has the right to protect lives and property. It is the duty of the police to make an assessment of the security situation and say we cannot give you a permit because we think that it is not the time for us to have a protest. And I tell you something.
Some people might say that you're tilting at windmills.
We've run out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Ismaila Ceesay, a highly respected political science lecturer at the University of the Gambia and leader of Citizens Alliance. Doctor, thank you so much for coming to the program. Quite appreciated.
Thank you.
And Mr. Moch, it's always a pleasure to have you on this program. Well, viewers, every time we bring an end to this program, do join us next week. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye. I was your host, Aliu Ceesay. Bye-bye.